Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. If you are watching this on any of our social media channels, you can see already that we've got a double helping of guests in this segment. And that's partly because we're doing a double segment to talk through the trends that we are observing in this latest admission cycle. Some things that are new, some things that are maybe not so new, and we'd love to talk through them. So I'm going to start with the top of my screen, which I think is just pretty random, and introduced my colleague, Zaragoza Guerra. Welcome to the show, Zaragoza.
Thank you, Ian. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you. And then, of course, we have down below me, but never beneath me, Jennifer Simons. Hey, Jen, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Glad to have you both. And you put together a really nice outline of some of the different things that we've observed. And I guess I would stipulate that we're still picking through some of the data. We're trying to see exactly how things have shaken out across a wide range of schools. But I wanted to start with some stuff that we may have seen this year that is different or that potentially points to changes directionally in the application process for students. Zaragoza, are there any particular things that you saw that really jumped out to you in the 2022-23 admission cycle?
Yeah, and this is a little bit different, but it's also still part of the same trajectory that we've been seeing. And I would say that, a lot of my students are oftentimes, when they're crafting their overall college lists, are looking to some of the UCs. Even if they're out of state, outside of California, they're looking at the UCs quite frequently. Oftentimes it's because there's one application and you can apply to multiple schools. So they try to increase their odds of getting into many more schools than usual. And sometimes they might, perhaps add a few schools more without necessarily taking a closer look at them, just because it's so easy to apply to them. And I think what I found this year is that there was a lot of disappointment, particularly with out-of-state students, non-Californian students, in that they saw many more wait lists than usual. And there were also a few surprises in terms of some of the UCs. So for instance, a lot of out-of-state students might not necessarily apply to UC Irvine. I think as a lot of schools in California, a lot of the UCs have become a lot more selective. There are probably a lot of out-of-state students who add it just because it's easy to add. And I think they were a bit surprised and taken back by, the fact that UC Irvine happens to be a pretty selective school. And many of them might not necessarily be aware of that. And I think, in recent years, it's become the third most selective UC. And I think that took a lot of students by surprise.
Yeah.
I think what also took a lot of students by surprise were those wait lists for out-of-state students. The UCs are starting to accept more Californians. They are the flagships. It's California that's paying those taxes to keep them going. And so a lot of students from out of state, I think, were a bit surprised by that and by the challenges, all the challenges that it takes to get into the UC system.
Yeah, it's California is a big state. It is a populous state. It is a state that is filled with some really talented academic students, and they made a decision to prioritize Californians more in their application process. Just to put some numbers on it, 8.6%, 11.4%, and 21%. You hear those numbers, you might think Duke, Northwestern, University of Virginia, like some really, really selective schools. Those are the admit rates for UCLA, for UC Berkeley, and for UC Irvine, respectively. And when I started here almost 10 years ago, UC Berkeley and UCLA were about 25% admit rates. So it is a trend that has been sharp, I think, over that period of time, but it is especially pronounced now that they are prioritizing Californians, especially. Yeah, Z, what do you got?
I think what's also surprising is, we've been tracking some of these numbers over the past couple of years, and I think even last year we saw that there were about 30 schools throughout the country that have admit rates under 10%. And, for a public university to have an admit rate under 10%, and Berkeley is not that far behind from UCLA.
Yeah.
That's pretty notable. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of disappointment, particularly with out-of-state students, and I would imagine a lot
Some
of
Californians
as well.
Certainly. And UCLA, 150,000 applications nearly. Berkeley had over 125,000 applications. When you look at an admit rate, one of the ways that it can go down is more people are applying. And I think the ease of the UC application points to that. Jen, I want to get your perspective out east and wonder if you're seeing any unusual shifts or changes in trends for schools out on the East Coast or in the Midwest. I mean, you don't have to focus on the East Coast.
No.
I thought you might want to.
A lot of my kids, I would second what Zaragoza said, but with state universities in general. So a lot of my kids apply, as Z said, out of the state system. What I'm noticing, so I'm in Massachusetts, and a lot of kids are realizing, thank goodness, that the University of Massachusetts is actually a really great school. I think I've seen it in the 6 years that I've worked at Bright Horizons College Coach really increase in popularity, which makes me really happy. But I still have students that apply, of course, to places like Wisconsin and, Michigan, perennially, whatever. Anyway, continually popular. So that's definitely like the schools that I thought would be, relatively safe, that's probable for my kids here. Really high flyers like Wisconsin, which I love, and they enroll in, waitlisted a bunch of really, really strong kids. That was shocking to me. So I think that colleges are not really knowing what to do. Maybe with the test optional situation and the increase that it has led to in a lot of the applicant pools. So that's like a big change. So basically everything that Zaragoza said about the UC system, I saw with other large state universities that have been very popular, much more selective. I've also seen, I'm sorry.
I want to pause on that real quick, because I think that that's something that I have felt as well in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with families is there are these different kind of cascading effects that you see all across enrollment management. I think one of the most notable is when, more selective schools go to a wait list, they pull students who are in another school, that causes them to go to the wait list, and so on and so forth. There's this kind of cascading effect. But I think we're starting to see that with public flagship universities as well, as Berkeley, UCLA, University of Texas, University of Michigan, UNC Chapel Hill, UVA. I think that's kind of like the more selective group. As they get even more selective, students are now applying to like your Georgias and your Wisconsins, and those are getting even more selective. And you're pointing out UMass Amherst. I've got University of Oregon here where I live that still is somewhat untouched by that effect. But I wonder what's going to happen over time as students start to say, well, now I got to apply to Oregon and UMass and University of Minnesota, great schools that are not any worse than the flagship universities. In my view, they're great, but they're not yet selective. They're not yet getting that volume. Is that something that you're perceiving? And is it something that you have any worries about?
Oh, no questions. Yeah, I'll let you answer. But University of Vermont, when they went to early decision, I thought, okay, here we go. They just had their first early decision round. That was a place that I felt comfortable, sending a wide range of students to, it attracts a lot of students. It's one of the few state universities that's in a city that students think is cool. And so, the same with CU Boulder and places like that. I'm definitely seeing, yes, I mean, the tide is bringing everybody to levels of greater competition, and it sort of scares me a little bit that good kids, it's just this unpredictability, but also who else are they shutting out? You know what I mean? We talk about access and why the state universities exist. And is the sort of equation being shifted a little bit too much to out-of-state kids? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Yeah, one of the things to, as you're considering, particularly with these flagships, is that they provide an incredible education at a discount for students. And the more out-of-state students that you take, the less in-state students get to take advantage of that incredible discount. As we're talking about prices for tuition and the cost of college, this is a saving grace for a lot of families, that flagship and access to that flagship. So I can, see the conversation shift in, a number of states, particularly that, are booming in terms of population. Hey, we need to, provide this opportunity for many more of our in-state students, particularly so that they can get the discount. If we want to increase the opportunity for, many more students to go to college and get that incredible education that the flagship provides. So you can probably see that a domino effect happening. I mean, I remember, as Jen, mentioned, when I was working in Massachusetts, students would look at certain states and think, hey, I can, count on that as my probable school, or, perhaps my possible school. And, that has slowly shifted, and they're becoming a lot more selective. And so then they gravitate towards the new state, and then the new state, and then the new state. And so you're seeing, students consider many more state universities that I don't think 20 years ago, an out-of-state student would have necessarily been considering in great numbers.
Right. And I think it is important to acknowledge, and I said this in passing, but I want to restate that these are great schools. Like many of these that are not particularly selective still have a really wonderful opportunity. My hope is that when my kids get to college age, that University of Oregon is still really great for students who want to stay in state, and that there's an opportunity for them there because they have a great honors college. It's closer to home. It's going to be more cost effective for us as a family. And I think my hope is that students are able to shift their mindset around what constitutes a good college before having to see the selectivity numbers that potentially reinforce that for them, right? Like it shouldn't take going below 30% admit rate for a student to say, oh, that's a good school all of a sudden. No, they just have more applications now. They are the same school that they were 5-10 years ago. And I think hoping that students start to see that and can get ahead of those trends, I think is really something I'm cheering on a little bit. Jen, you look like you had something that you wanted to add.
I just wanted to add, because I just thought of it, University of Florida, because they continue to require the SATs, is a little bit in a different category. And so that's interesting. I wonder if it's also because kids that would otherwise want to apply test optional and apply to University of Florida are not applying there, if it's sort of trickling into other places. But what I've noticed here in the Northeast is I saw a shift several years ago to interest in Southern schools. I couldn't really understand. I think it was a TikTok phenomenon for kids applying to Alabama and, big, Clemson and places like that. They're great schools, but like it's unusual. And now I'm seeing the reverse, parents saying, I don't want my daughter, quite frankly, to go to, maybe certain places that, the politics of our country is informing, I think, choices in a way that it hasn't in my career.
Yeah, very, very interesting to see some of those. And there have been some data around those that have been published in many of the higher education journals. 1 in 4 students, I think they said, I think it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education, pointed out that 1 in 4 students decided not to apply to an institution because of the politics in that state, which I think is really interesting. I think it's always been an informant in student decision-making, but perhaps is a little bit more explicit these days than it has been in the past. I had something else I wanted to ask, and I've just lost track of it. Darn it. You know what we'll do? Let's go to a break. We're going to take a break because we have to take a break anyway. But Zaragoza and Jen are going to be back for our next segment. And we're going to talk about some other things that we've seen, perhaps some lessons that we have already learned that students have not yet learned that we want to reinforce for them. So stick around. We'll be back with our third segment discussing admissions trends. Don't go away.